Hmm.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Professor Brandon Miller from the Arts Department here. And to all of you participants and people online and here in this amazing 360-degree space, welcome to MPAC, the Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center at Rensselaer. And welcome to ISATMA 2025, which is the International Symposium of Assistive Technology for Music and Art, presented by MPAC Research, the Center for Deep Listening. This is a forum for technologies, exploring new technologies and new kinds of artistic experiences. The ISATMA workshop's themes this spring are reconnecting with nature, neurodivergent knowing and creating. And this is the second of two conversations. On March 26th, we had a panel that focused on everything from the breadth of breathing to AI developments. And today in the second session, we will have neurodivergent knowing and creating, media thinking, scholarship, pedagogy, and CRIP curation. This workshop is sponsored by the iEar Presents series through the RPI Arts Department, the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences at Rensselaer. Also, MPAC and iEar Presents programs are made possible by the New York State Council for the Arts and support of the Governor's Office in the New York State Legislature. And this today is also supported by MPAC Research, the Center for Deep Listening, and our deepest thanks to all the staff. Before we get started, we want to do a land acknowledgement. It is with gratitude and humility that we acknowledge we are working, practicing, learning, researching, and gathering at the ancestral lands of the Mohican people, who are the indigenous peoples of the land. Despite tremendous hardship in being forced from here, today their community resides in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge-Muncie community. We pay honor and respect for their past and present as we search for a more inclusive and equitable space for all. Let us ask what we can do to lift and raise our voices, the voices of the indigenous people in our area and around the world, and honor and respect their sovereignty. In that spirit, let this amazing ISATMA workshop begin. We are here within MPAC's 360-degree projection space to gather and consider neurodivergence. Together, we will dream this forward. And I want to introduce Allison Holt, who has conceived and facilitated this amazing opportunity. She is in her second year of the PhD Arts Department at RPI. Thank you, Allison, for your creativity, for your heart, and for envisioning this space for us to all dream these critically important ideas forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Thanks, everyone. And I want to thank I'm talking into the Zoom and thanking my collaborator, the Director of Research at MPAC, Jonas Brash, and my co-facilitator, Johnny Drury, and everybody at MPAC. You've been incredible, particularly Eric Brucker, Sam Chabot, who's supporting today, and Shannon Johnson, Michael Valaquette. So I kind of want to set a context for this day. I've invited you and these participants to an encounter in which our group is free from normative ways of socially relating, especially from any impulse to educate. We'll discuss theories, but more importantly, we're gathering together the acumen of thinkers and practitioners here to open a window of possibility to genuinely move forward the potential inherent in our sessions titled Neurodivergent Knowing and Creating, Media, Thinking, Scholarship, Pedagogy, CRIP Curation. So there are students here, there's faculty here. Those online may join the sort of emergent rhythm of our gait, so to speak. So to ask for clarification where necessary, and you're welcome to come and go as you please. Please be comfortable. So I want to invite my co-facilitator, Johnny Drury, to say a few things about his role, and then I'll introduce all the participants. So Johnny Drury is the founder of Dialogica UK and the creator of the autism dialogue approach and my co-facilitator. So Johnny, feel free.
Thank you. Thank you, Alison. Hi, everyone. To say a few words, my creative practice is grounded in dialogue as collective sense making, vulnerability, presence, and the ethics of deep listening and caring. The autistic experience, often pathologized, actually invites a kind of atopos, a strangeness, an out of placeness that opens us up to new knowing, new meaning, and all kinds of influences. Autism is a radical permeability, and my belief is it holds generative power, which is why it's such an honor to be here. Dialogue is vital now more than ever in this climate of deep fragmentation, where the terror of individualism has hardened us against both uncertainty and each other. Our gathering must be a radical letting be to facilitate the birth of new knowing, new sense creating together. Dialogue is the seed, watered with the practices of authentic voice, respect, listening, and suspension. The systems that confine us cannot imagine our futures, but we can and we must. As practiced since the beginning of time, we are here together to say what needs to be said, and if nothing needs saying, nothing is said. This pause is ours, and it's a sacred space. Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce the participants. I'll just list them, and then we will invite them to give a brief bio. Erin Manning is the research chair of speculative pragmatism, art, and pedagogy in the Faculty of Fine Arts at Concordia University. Hannah de Jager is a philosopher and cognitive scientist, an interdependent scientific advisor and teacher in Mind and Life Europe. Ellen Waterman, who unfortunately needs to go at 4 p.m., I hope she talks about why. It's an awesome reason, is a professor in the School for Studies in Art and Culture and Helmut Kallman Chair for Music at Carleton University. Anne Fox is a professor of English at Davidson University and an independent crip curator. Lindsay Dolichfeld is a lecturer, writing and rhetoric program at Stanford University and disability and access impact lead for Leonardo Isast. So if everybody would like to give a brief bio, whatever you'd like to say about your practice, your research interests, give about 2 minutes. And it looks like Erin has yet to join us. Hopefully she'll be on her way soon. So let's just move through.
Alison, can you ask the techie to highlight whoever's speaking, please?
Yes, I can. Just asked him to come on over. Oh, are you? Can you highlight whoever is speaking? Sounds like it'll automatically do that, Johnny?
Yeah, still I can see that it's me. Behind you,
Great.
Alison, still me.
Behind, I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, so on the screen is still me being projected as the main speaker instead of you. So it's not automatic.
Okay, when you stop talking, it will change. So I am talking now, and yeah, he's right, it's not changing.
Listen, I think that might be because your Zoom is so
Oh, but it's required that I mute. right. Uh-huh. So I think they're okay. So it's going to stay like this? Yeah. So it'll highlight the person Hannah just spoke and became the primary person. Okay. Would you like to start, Hannah?
I guess I did.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. Thank you, Alison, and everyone for organizing this, and thank you, everyone, for coming and being here. So 2 minutes to introduce myself. I'm a philosopher and a cognitive scientist. I used to be, I'm a former associate professor of philosophy, but sometimes I really don't know who I am. And I actually, maybe today, would like to not know so much who I am and leave it at that and enter into the space in that way. Yeah.
Ellen, would you like to go?
I really appreciate the way you just put that, Hannah. Um, I'm coming to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation in Ottawa, Canada, and at a time of unusual, bumptious nationalism rearing its ugly head on both sides of our border, I think, and at a time where borders are in the public discourse more than they ever ought to be. So I think it's a good time to think about who we are. I'm a mom. I'm a musician, primarily an improviser. I'm a listener who has spent a lot of time trying to relearn how to listen over recent years. And I have shifted my emphasis from being a kind of wearing an ethnomusicologist's hat, because I do work in the academy, to really in a third act of a career focusing on participatory arts for social change. I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you. Anne, do you would like to continue?
Thank you, Allison. I just want to echo everyone's thanks to MPAC and ISATMA and to Rensselaer, and most of all to Allison for convening us all. It's a privilege to be in your presence. I also want to acknowledge that I'm on the unceded lands of the Catawba Nation in Davidson, North Carolina, which is just north of Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm also feeling really so privileged to be with you all as a powerful act of resistance to the anti-intellectualism and the hatred being directed against imperiled communities, as Ellen eloquently said, on both sides of the border, but of course globally, but of course especially horrifically in the US for those of us who are living here. So I'm really feeling so happy to be here as an act of resistance to that, and an act of love. Um, Disability studies is a great love of my life. I'm an English professor, but I've kind of morphed into more of a cultural studies and visual studies professor. I sort of have always been in love with representations. And later in life, the last 15 years or so, I've worked as a independent curator, co-curating with my collaborator, Jessica Cooley. And I can talk more about our work if it comes up, but I think I'll leave it at that. And also just end by saying reading Hannah and Aaron's work for this session was such a privilege and so deeply resonant in ways that blew my mind. So Hannah, since you're here, I'll thank you. And hopefully I'll get to thank Erin when she arrives. So thank you.
Thank you, Anne. It will come up. Lindsay, please.
Hi,
Love to hear from you.
everyone. It is such a delight and privilege to be here. As everyone else said, just my thanks to Allison and her community for organizing this. It's also, I just really appreciate the opportunity to be in hybrid space like this. This is so far really incredibly well done, and I know this is so challenging from technical capacity, so this is a real treat for me. So I'll be brief, but I'm someone who wears a lot of hats. I just like everyone else here. I am a scholar, a writer, a curator, and an educator who explores how disability shapes technological culture and communication. And this is I identify as a long-time hearing aid and bilateral cochlear implant user, as a deaf person, as a disabled person. So I'm very interested in how we sort of interface with technologies and cultural practices. I, like some of the other folks here, also have a background in literature and English. That's where I earned my degree. And, I've been fortunate to be invited into the arts curatorial space, which has been like a real treat for me and still kind of early in that journey. So I'm eager to talk a little bit more about that. So I think I'll stop there.
Perhaps early, but quite accomplished, I will say. Um, so thank you all. I'm Allison Lee Holt. I'm a PhD candidate here at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in the Electronic Arts Department and the facilitator and organizer in this session of ISATMA. I use techniques of expanded cinema and the light and space movement to make models and thought experiments and situations about divergent manifestations of mind. So this dialogue is one of those situations. I've taught neurodivergent folks for primarily experimental video for 13 years as neurodivergent media. So let's see, this is a work in progress. Oh, Erin Manning is here. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. I'm so sorry. I lost track of time.
Not at all. I'm glad to see you. Welcome.
Yes. So I'm just happy to be here. I'm not sure who I'm introducing myself to. I'm a philosopher and an artist, and I work around questions of normopathy and other ways of knowing and pedagogy. And I'm just excited to be talking with all of you.
Erin, thank you. You should be able to see a view in your gallery called MPAC Systems, and that's the room that we're all standing in now within the 360-degree screen. So there are people in here. It is quite dark, but we have a pretty good collection of folks in bean bags and sleeping bags, and there's a puppy, and it's awesome. So let's see. Let me make my first attempt at, directing this. One moment. Here we go. So, if Sam is here, I'm trying to play an animation and it doesn't seem to be playing, but I will talk anyway. I wanted to say that I'd like to spark our dialogue with a couple of points, and I'll start by discussing, in part, context, which I brought up earlier. This is an ever-changing thing. In this moment of dangerous and intense change, can we bring attention to our intersubjectivity right here and right now? How do we co-determine our contexts and recognize ourselves as, in fact, nested within a welter of context? Heidegger's theory of participatory sense-making brings attention to this. But importantly, it's being put into practice across fields of knowledge. What's important now is action. So perhaps, Hannah, could you start by drawing this out a little bit? And I would like to enter into the dialogue now. Let us be actually communicating with each other comfortably and with trust. So please feel free. And I can restate the question if you'd like. So how can we bring attention to our subjectivity in this moment, in how we co-determine our contexts, that our participation in contexts? Intersubjectivity seems to be really rooted in context and the space between us. So participatory sense making, as I understand it, is bringing a lot of attention to the relationship between people, and that the actual relationship constitutes an identity in and of itself. So maybe you can draw that out just a little bit, and how participatory sense making is being put into practice across fields of knowledge.
Thank you, Alison, for the prompt.
Sure.
I didn't expect it, and so I'm a little confused, which maybe is nice actually. I don't know. I will say something to that. So participatory sense making is all about how we maintain ourselves as we engage with each other, each person with their own presence and being and history as they come. And then, so I and other people, you, who I'm speaking to, some of whom I can see, some of whom I cannot, there is an interaction going on between us, as indicated on the screen there, visually by Alison's work. And so all these elements, each of our own self-maintenance and the maintenance of the interactive process between us, all of these things take us up in various forms, and sometimes also don't take us up. And the reason I'm a little bit confused right now is that I've been listening to Erin on the Core Action Program, talking about teaching and questioning the very notion of intersubjectivity. And because subjectivity is something that can be put on us by others, or we can put it on ourselves easily, or we can exclude people from subjectivity also easily, even without noticing or on purpose. And all of those things are going on at the same time also. And taking in your words, Erin, I've tried to, or I sort of feel bodily that, I want to maybe sort of think it out of me so that I am nobody for a little while. I'm coming into this dialogue in this way. And at the same time, that's impossible because I have a name, the name is there, and it's linked to certain things. And so, and there's where the confusion resides right now. And so maybe I would like to leave it at that. And then, because Alison, you did ask about where participatory sense making is being taken up in the world, in practices. I mean, that's also true, but maybe, I don't know, this confusion of being and being present could be a starting point as well.
Yeah.
To parents' work as well.
If anybody wants to jump in, please do, but I just want to validate the feeling of confusion in identity in such a turbulent time. It's causing us to confront the things that attach us to benefit, to the ways in which we've engaged in the systems that are asserting themselves aggressively, that are crumbling. So it is totally, like, it seems to me the most appropriate response. Yeah.
It makes me think about collaboration as a conundrum. In other words, we're trying to have this collaborative discussion within the context of institutions that prioritize individuation within the context of a society that that always privileged individuation, but now is turning up the volume on that and saying that's so desirable. So I guess what I'm saying is it's kind of an act of care to embrace that sense of conundrum, because we're trying to push past a little bit. I'm Ann Fox, I have these titles. It's, here's what I'll front about myself first. So I really hear what you're saying, Hannah, and I thank you for that.
Does anyone else feel like jumping in? Yeah, Ellen.
When you spoke, Hannah, it made me think of improvising with people. This kind of flow of presence, co-presence that happens in a musical improvisation situation, the kind of experimental free improv situations I find myself in, that are definitely power situations. There's definitely an ebb and flow of power, sometimes contest, sometimes disagreement and dissensus, but it's also a kind of co-present holding of each other in the moment, because it only really works if everybody's giving the whole group, as well as from their own places of sounding and listening. It's a little inchoate. It's a little hard to put into words, but I feel like that tensile. What did you call it, Erin? The voluminous expression. I thought that was such a generative kind of way of conceiving of that sense of co-presence in space.
It also made me think about a place I recognized what I work on in Hannah and Erin's work, because this idea of approaching with love, or this idea of not insisting on agency, I recognized it as, in disability studies, access intimacy. This idea of, for those of you who don't know the term, this idea of entering into someone's presence, anticipating what their needs might be, which also requires a movement outside of self and a movement with love, which also, by letting the teamingness wash over us. I think, again, this idea of what can we learn from neurodivergence when we center it as generative. And so just to build on what others are saying.
It's so beautiful to listen to you, and we're speaking so much right in the middle of where the thinking is happening for me. I wonder if I could just give you the example of a class I taught yesterday. It's the end of the semester, and I taught my last class, and I know that we, just from who's in the room, that we all know the feeling of the vulnerability of the pedagogy, like what it is to be in the encounter with the opportunity to learn together, and how fragile that is. You can have such good experiences, and you can have, at least I can have, such not good experiences, depending. I'm in as you probably know, or some of you might know, I've really, really focused on a neurodiverse classroom now for decades, and it's not popular with my colleagues. And I think it's not popular with my colleagues because my view on neurodiversity is that it really has to grow its own ethos. So I'm not making any large statements. There's nothing on my syllabus that says this is a neurodiverse classroom. There's nothing like that. It's just really, really trying to not take neurotypicality as the baseline, and to think about how the university wants us to keep it as a baseline by tagging on a few good statements about decolonization, a few good statements about ableism or whatever, diversity. And so, I can talk about it more if people are interested, but 5 years ago, my partner, Brian Masumi, and I started a project called the Three Ecologies Project. And I'm there right now. It's maple season, nothing like like making maple syrup as a collective participatory sense making experiment. But this is an environment that people really thrive in. And the university has clamped down and doubled my teaching. So there's a tension right now that I'm living in terms of how the university wants to organize my body. And so I'm telling you this because it doubled the teaching I'm doing. I love the classroom, but as you all know, doubling the teaching is a lot when you're working with non-normative ways. You're spending a lot of other time. I don't think of it as emotional labor. I love it, but it is like evenings and weekends and thinking with people across many, many stages of their lives and wondering with them how to move in a world that is so violent. And anyway, I did something that I've never done before. I invited the undergrads. I hadn't been in an undergraduate classroom for quite a while, to invent the course with me. And so we built a course together called Concepts for the End of the World. And I mean, I teach in studio arts, so these would be artists. And all I did in the beginning was to give them a sense of what I think a concept can do. And then we spent the first class generating the concepts that felt necessary for us to engage. And then I found readings around those concepts. And then we grew each of the concept, one concept a week. And then I gave them 2 weeks off, the 2 weeks before the last class, because I have a curiosity about what it means to return into conversation. It's like, what can happen? Because the class ends and we never see each other. And I wanted kind of the class to end and then to start again. And at the very last class, I had asked them to make a book by themselves or collectively that they needed to carry into the end of the world. And so yesterday was the last class, and I gave them all an A the first day of class. I talk a lot about value in my classes, and I suggested to them that they could think about not signing the books. They could also sign them. It wasn't one or the other, but that it would be okay if they didn't want to sign them. So I walked into the classroom. There were some people in the room, there were about 50 students that I had never seen. So like those students, I got emails also through the term, a few from people saying, I hear you get an A anyway, so I just want to let you know that I'm not coming to class. A bit odd, but these kinds of things. And then, but this work was spellbinding, unbelievable. And some of them had invited friends and family members. Some of them had made food. Like, it was spellbinding. It made me cry. But at the end of the class, so we looked at the work, and I said to them at the end, I don't really know how we leave each other in these times. I don't know how to think in these times. But what I do know is that you did some work that gave everybody the opportunity to be in the value, which is to say, some people did nothing in this class in the kind of academic sense. Some people didn't make books, didn't show up to class, and they're also getting an A. So I thanked them, for holding those other people and allowing them to have a term where they didn't have to do the work. What's interesting was that a lot of students cried, and I stayed a bit afterwards, and the students didn't leave the class, and students who hadn't done anything came to me to tell me they hadn't done anything. And I said to them, but I'd rather have another kind of conversation. But of course, it won't surprise you to know that these were students who were neurodiverse, and that was always my, they're overwhelmed. They have too many classes. They're in a time of their lives where they don't know how to make all of these different things work together. They've lost confidence. They don't feel like language is their friend. They can't leave their apartments and so on. So anyway, I just wanted to add that to the question of how we participate together, because I think that the way that I move is not at all to be in judgment of other ways. It's really to ask, like, if we put this little experiment together, could it grow something? And if it grew something, could you then mobilize something else? And the last thing I'll say is that when I came home and I told Brian about the experiments, Brian said, well, how were they on the concept? And I said, terrible. Like, I don't think they got what I meant by a concept at all. You know, but that doesn't matter because they'll find their way there. I think what they felt was something else, was that they could do something. And if that's all that they got, and I think that's already a lot, that's totally fine. And so the books are actually super self-centering. They're like, after like a full term of me explaining the problem of the subject and whiteness and normopathy, you know, I would say 90% of them are in the first person, and you know, but I think that's okay too, you know.
I think it is too. I just want to say that that may also be evidence of how difficult it is to know how to be like what you are at this time. You know, whatever prompt you're giving to them is going to carry on, and they're struggling with it, and it's just the, you know, baby step in trying to meet that. Yeah. Does anyone want to respond to Erin? I have something I'd like to follow with, but I want to give you a chance to chime in.
I'll jump in here. So this is Lindsay speaking. That's pretty tough to follow. That was an incredibly beautiful and moving story, and I feel so inspired listening to you as I am in the midst of my own teaching, actually starting a new quarter with an entirely new group of students. So slightly different sort of moment in the cycle. And I love so much about these ideas and how radical they are, you know, flipping the script, giving them their grade, and then letting them sort of work from those expectations. And I find myself wondering, like, how can I do that in my space of my particular university? And I mean, so just for a little bit of context, I teach in an undergraduate program that's a required class. So all freshmen and sophomores have to take these core sequences of classes. So that's a very different kind of perspective, right? Because that curriculum has been approved by the faculty senate. We're all supposed to be teaching the same assignments. Yet at the same time, there was a recognition that some flexibility and expansiveness in those assignments. We have an incredibly interdisciplinary program of researcher, teachers, scholars. But I find myself very constrained in what I can do. And some of that has to do in some ways with the precarity of my own teaching position. And so even though I do have a fairly secure position in my particular program, I'm also deeply aware if I get too radical, so to speak, then I might be sticking my neck out a little bit. And so I think there's a tension here in how far can we go in resisting and still kind of accomplishing the work within these sort of boxes that we're put in.
I can speak just quickly to that, Lindsay. Thank you for that. And I hear you. And I was banned from many courses very, very early on that everybody had to take. And I was banned from undergraduate teaching, which is why I haven't done it. It's not at all. I'm telling you this because there's been a lot of uneasiness with my ways in the university. And it took me a long time. I think I told this to Allison, like a long time to even recognize neurodiversity in me. And the reason was shame. And because my own neurodiversity is just not very sexy. I spent a couple of years in a psychiatric institution. You know, if I don't move from self, it's because it's not a generative place for me to think at all, right? So what I've come to realize is that while my colleagues, some of them might have thought that I was trying to like cause problems, I actually just wasn't understanding the normative ways. I didn't go to school. I have a bit of an unusual background. I was, for the most part, not institutionalized at all. I grew up on a commune. My parents were teachers, but they taught in school and they left me at home. And And so I went to university. I was not quite 16 in Germany, and I meandered. And when I entered the university as a professor, I really thought we would all be so excited by each other's research and we would be able to learn together. And I learned really, really fast and hard that it wasn't going to be that way. And I mean, I'm being very personal here because I don't know how else to say this. My own survival depends on being able to learn. My tether onto the world has always been fragile. And so it hasn't really been a possibility for me to not be learning and so I think that I've become more and more unscared that less and less I can be destroyed. What I mean by that is I've become more experimental. I'm a full professor. I mean, what are they going to do? But they did try to get rid of me at every stage. And I did go up with a lawyer at every stage. And what saved me, ironically, because you might as well have the cards on the, all out, is that I meet the neoliberal requirements of the institution. It just happens that the things I love to do are things it respects. I write. And almost all the students that I work with do not meet those requirements. So it's sort of, I realized pretty early on that I had this kind of superpower. I could, because I love to think and write and make art, obviously, I could fight for people not to use language, because you could never accuse me of not being interested in it. You could never say I wasn't philosophically curious. And so in a way, it's the work that happened outside the university that always protected me, because the university wants that recognition. But I don't want to give you the impression that has been in any way easy. I've had a million stomach aches, and I can't afford to live without teaching. So I've had to make the decision about that. So it's not an unpragmatic thought. And I would never, ever think that we all have to do it the same way. Even just hearing what you say gives me the confidence in a way that I don't have naturally. It's the push and pull between us that is necessary, is what I guess I'm trying to say.
I have to jump in. I have to say that this is the reason for calling this a dialogue, calling this an emergent dialogue, because I think through dialogue, and everything that you said has been super resonant with me. I feel quite similarly. What you were just bringing up was doing knowledge production in a way that benefits the institution, right? So I've heard you say that other students who are equally, productive, equally generative, equally working on a similar way, if they don't write, if they don't do something that's engaging in the market, that's recognized by the market, then it isn't considered genuine knowledge production or valuable knowledge production. So I have a question that I want to, this is like a second point of the spark of the dialogue, and then I kind of want to let it go. I want to just, and it's going to tie back into some of the things that you've just said, Erin. I just want to suggest that there's a really important point that comes up in the current Mind and Life Europe podcast episode called Learning Laterally, Unsettling the Normative Gestures of Pedagogy, with you and Joël Adin. So Johnny and I, full disclosure, have been guests on the recent episode, and all of these episodes are following up our participation with Hannah's core in action semester last spring with Mind and Life Europe. So at the 1 hour mark, pretty much dead on, it came to a crux. There, we started talking about neuronormativity and normopathy in education. We should probably kind of name what normopathy means for everyone. But to paraphrase what came up right then, if you'll indulge me, you discussed the intentions of the neurodiversity movement to think through this way of being in the world that wasn't reduced to needing a cure, but also not reduced to individualism. So this is a complexity that's really difficult for our society to wrap its head around. You said that independence in our society is inherent on its discourse of value. So, bringing back how things are, how people are valued, how minds are valued, how knowledge production is valued, how bodies are valued. So you said we are supposed to do our thinking alone. This is an extremely dangerous way of operating. It's at the center of how we model accreditation, how we think about intelligence and the body. Neurotypicality can't be a person because it's a normative baseline. You mentioned this earlier. That has a whole set of conditions attached to it that turn us into palatable people. According to what? There are very established modes of, like definitions of what is palatable in the context of being a body and being a knowing body. Neurotypicality isn't a state of being. There are practices that are neurotypical that form bodies and shape them, and that's normopathy. But at a crux of thinking, I heard you saying that you want to really emphasize that neurotypicality and whiteness are the same. They function within a colonial matrix that understands in advance what it is to person. So I'd like to invite everyone into this as something that we can have a generative conversation about. It's a totally safe space. We can talk about anything.
I want to respond to that a little bit and also to Lindsay's earlier question, because I teach first year writing as part of my work. And so I really hear what you're saying about how do we embrace this paradox of getting a student to form this like individual voice, but within the pedagogical devices of the university, and also because they're going to go out into Stanford and have to write for other classes, just like at Davidson. I find myself living more in the in-between space. Like, I absolutely love what you're describing, Erin. I find myself sort of living more in a more liminal area, though, and so I guess what I would say to you, Lindsay, is sort of where can you put pressure on ways of teaching that also feed into different modalities. So what I mean by that is, like, for example, I teach first year writing around disability. And so I often get neurodivergent students, and how they work to create that individual voice is so different for all of them. But for example, one of the things we do is do a lot of collaborative work, like peer review, generating the critical question, just so much that's discussion based at the front end and not just on the back end. It's about, what's the thing you produced. It doesn't always work. I have to admit, I've struggled with my own neurotypicality, right? I was rewarded throughout my education and career for being neurotypical, but I've learned a lot about trying to modulate my expectations. I had a student who really couldn't get a single paper written last year. I'm on sabbatical, but we still were able to frame what she did as a success because she was so invested in peer review, so invested in developing the critical question with her colleagues. So even just trying, yeah, she got a C, okay, whatever. I had to, my grading philosophy, I love saying A up front, but I'm still too bound to my typical structure. But we see each other all the time, and she's always telling me what she's working on in her writing now, because I think what she did is come out of that class going, well, just because I didn't produce this product doesn't mean I didn't learn things about my writing process. So I guess it's a question of framing, a question of where we can put pressure on how we talk to them about their work, what we deploy. I mean, I keep coming back to Erin's point about neurodivergence is generative, and that just rings so true with things that you and I know in disability studies, like disability gain and deaf gain. So anyway, sorry, long-winded. We can talk more one-on-one, but those are just some of the things. And I feel like that moves away from that kind of sense of students are vessels waiting to be filled with our knowledge of, how to write right or how to act right. But I also, this will be the last thing I say, I also appreciate that I'm coming at this as a tenured full professor, as opposed to someone who's building their career, might not have a tenure line or whatever. So it's a dance. Yeah, I totally hear you.
And I'll also just throw another intangible into the mix, which is AI. And I don't want to be the person saying this, but Allison, your question about coloniality and neurotypicality, and I'm just thinking about, these AI systems which are reinforcing, a flattened hierarchy of voice here, and students I find are turning to AI to support them in their thinking, and I am so deeply concerned about what this means for our thinking. So it's just something that my colleagues and I have been doing a lot of work about, and this really seems to kind of touch on this moment of uncertainty and how we're going to evolve. And I know that there have been many, many writing tools, from, pens and pencils to our laptop computers to grammar correctors, and maybe this is one more sort of notch in that tool belt for us, but there's something fundamentally different about this in shaping at least how many students are approaching writing. So I don't know, I just wanted to raise that because this is something I'm thinking about.
Yeah,
Well,
it
AI,
feels,
I'm sorry, just going to say AI wasn't, I mean, the pencil wasn't based on extracting and mining stuff that was already racist, so there's that too. I'm sorry, I'm gonna be quiet because I saw Ellen had a point to make, and Allison, I'm gonna be quiet. Sorry.
Well, it sort of turns the discussion a little bit, though. So I was just coming back, Allison, to your this connection of neurotypical practices, whiteness, coloniality, matrix, and also one of the things that you mentioned to us in preparing for this session that Johnny had said, it's not about diversity, it's about wholeness, and thinking about us all being there's no typical, right? We're all neurodivergent in a certain way, which is not to say that we all move through the world in different ways, right? Ways that are more or less contested. But it really got me thinking about a couple of other colleagues who've said things that makes me think that this wholeness idea of being part of, being complicit in, being again actively present in with one another and not so much across difference, which is the way I might have thought about it at a certain point, right? So I have this colleague, Chris Riddle, who's a climate crisis communicator, and we're talking about a new project, and he said something about, climate injustice is a real thing. People have differential effects of climate change depending on racialization, social, economic factors, all kinds of things. But we're all insecure, right? We are all insecure. And also thinking about another colleague, Maya Chikabi, who gives an amazing course on Indigenous cultural competency and trauma-informed training. And she says something, she says we're all colonized, right? Like we're all, that it is not to say again that Indigenous people where I live were not dispossessed and horribly treated, that there isn't genocide. But it is to say, like, we're all affected by that system. And as she beautifully and I think poetically puts it, it's all our responsibility to unfuck colonialism, right? I think that's maybe the place for me. I don't experience. I'm old, right? And I'm I'm at a place in my career where I'm mainly research based, and so I'm in the classroom in a very lovely, limited way where I get to expend and feel a lot of care. But I no longer feel like I need to police anybody. I don't need to teach anybody how to do anything. I early in my career learned that leaving the room was often the most effective pedagogical technique that I could use, especially in the context of teaching music. But what I am feeling in the collaborative projects that I've been doing with folks with disabilities or folks who are, have different kind of experiences in artistic collaboration, and particularly in working with deaf musicians, is that my job is learning. Like my job is learning how to be differently. And I mean, I think that's probably the main task that we can model for anybody, is just that kind of uncertainty, that in betweenness. I think, as Hannah put it a while ago, and that's not. It's not helpful in some concrete way, maybe, and it certainly doesn't help you negotiate power in your institution. But I'm eager to somehow be in spaces where the things that are amazingly different about us don't constitute difference, but instead constitute points of connection.
I want to bring together a couple of things. I'm drawn to do something here. I feel, first of all, like I'm remembering back to your comments, Ellen, about improvisation, and I think that, in a sense, what we're doing now is that. This I've asked you all to come unmediated, and we are all very much improvising. So there's a part of what you were just responding to with Lindsay that has been nagging at me, and the AI and whiteness, in terms of how students are using it, is an offloading of their responsibility to face themselves, to be present, as you were just mentioning. There is discomfort in confronting the attachments, the things that draw upon all of us to feel that we are benefiting from the systems in which we live. None of us benefit from the systems in which we live. All of us are unsafe within the systems in which we live. And there are, to different degrees, we can participate in fantasies that we are less unsafe, but it isn't true. And when we're confronted with writing exercises, all of the things that almost all of us are in academic situations, and it's a struggle. We are engaged in struggles to face ourselves. It's our job as human beings to face ourselves, and it's very painful and difficult to do. But that's the only way we become whole. And it's the only way we can really be responsible to one another. So this is the definition of whiteness, the privilege to not have to face yourself and to offload your responsibility onto whatever. So AI is now the thing, and it feels like it's okay to do because it's not going to come complaining to you. It's not going to file a lawsuit. But it will cause you problems because it's not doing you any good to not be able to face yourself.
Well, I could maybe enter there. There's so many interesting little bits and pieces, so I'm not going to hold things together. But just a few thoughts around what you were saying, Ellen. I was thinking about and also Lindsay, and also Anne, thinking about how much we don't know. In another class, I have a non-speaking, I don't like that terminology, but a non-speaking autistic Adam Wolf, and I have John Lee Clark, who's deafblind, with 2 co-navigators, and I have Adrian Clark, who's deaf, and I have, the rest that are whatever the complicated mix they are, but doesn't stand out in ways that I could name directly. And it's the first class I've taught with John. I don't know if you know John Lee Clark's work, but if you don't know it, you got to know it. It's amazing work. And it's the first class that I've taught John. And John and I are friends, so it's a bit odd. But anyway, John decided he wanted to do a PhD. There hasn't been one in the deafblind community, and it's just feels important right now, given his position. So we're kind of using Concordia to make this happen. But one of the things that has been really interesting to me is that John's not really in my class, because none of my techniques are given to deafblind teaching. I'm a close reader. Both John and Adrian have explained to me that both of them come through ASL. They both come through deaf culture. It has a different way, let's just say it that way. And my way of coming back to the sentence and growing a thought from the sentence, it's just not their way. And but this way has proven to be extremely rich for neurodiversity, because if we stay with the sentence, we're not getting people pontificating and showing how smart they are. And we can really stay with the quality of what the words are doing and live in languages sensory fullness as well, right? But it is this kind of language, not the other kinds, right? And so here I am teaching this class, and John and I are always laughing, because I'll say to him, well, what were you guys doing while I was teaching? It's like, oh yeah, well, I did my bills for a while, and then we had a conversation about how we couldn't really understand because the interpreters weren't good enough to understand what you were speaking. We couldn't find the place in the text, but then we were talking about this. And then it made me realize, of course, that we've never been able to know what the daydreams are in a room, right? Like we've never known what's actually happening in those spaces. And we've just always hoped that an ethos could be shared in them that could give people the excitement to keep learning. I think that's what any good teacher has just always hoped, that something could grow there, And I think we're far less capable of choosing the shape it takes than we might imagine we are. And I think if we realize that, that will give the institution far less of a hold on us, because we are the institution. That's sort of where I want to get at. We make it. It isn't some kind of other thing, Many of us have had administrative positions. I have, and have talked about budgets, and have decided who gets admitted and who not, and have sat on dissertation committees and have been externals. And so we're all in that environment of sedimenting values of a colonial environment. And so I would prefer to be in sort of sticky, thick, uneasy, complicated conversations than to be in the blah blah of decolonization and the blah blah, just because I don't believe in it. I don't believe that it's a rhetorical thing. I think the practices are where the work happens. And I think when the practices are still completely tethered to colonial modes of functioning, you don't have decolonization. And you don't have, you have a kind of ableism that is really potent. Now I don't, but at the same time, what I learned from Black studies is that to be in the refusal of something is often to be mimicking the shape it likes to take. So I loved what you said, Ellen, about walking out of the room, because that's not being in a refusal. That's just being in another kind of movement. And when you're in another kind of movement, then something else begins to reverberate, and something else very, very slowly begins to percolate. I think though, this is the last thing I'll say. I can only speak for myself, but at least once a term, I have a real battle inside myself where I want to fail a whole bunch of people in the class. And I walk to the university and I have this like real war where I'm like, you never show up to my class. You're not listening to me. You're not learning from me. And I fail them in my imagination. They always get an A the first day of class, so I can't actually do it. But I realize how strong in me still is the feeling that if you don't do it my way, I could, and I might want to punish you. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's, or, I suffered for this, so you have to suffer for this, or whatever way we have of talking about it. And I think that this is the pathological part of the normopathy. And it's probably good to be curious about it and hopefully have a sense of humor about it, because I think we really are in it. Like the pathologies are very strong in us. And it's, or speaking for myself, the idea that there's a shape in which things can do better work than other shapes is quite strong. I mean, we've gone through a lot of education, and how I notice neurotypicality flowing through that is something that helps me think this through.
I wanted to ask something about all of this. Like, part of fantasy that I have about our gathering today is that we are, well, maybe I'll bring something that is part of one of the kind of questions and the thought clusters that I shared with everyone to sort of prime you or inform you what's going on in my head before starting all of this. And it had to do with, let's see, oh, yeah. So in an early conversation with you, Aaron, you asked, could we grow a thought movement? Is that something that we could do as part of this dialogue? And, I extended that by asking if we can look at ourselves as nodes in an emergent network of original knowledge, thinking together intersubjectively, which I feel like we're doing. But I'm curious how we can actually carry it forward beyond, like imagine pedagogy outside of colonialism, outside of normopathy. Like, what is it going to be? It's going to be something else in the future. So if we imagine that future as existing already, is there some part of that we can kind of like, I don't know, bring into the room, or like identify parts of things that are in our practices already or our thinking that feel like it's going there, or that it might be like going in that direction or heading towards that bullseye, which is obviously ever changing, ever moving, the game that shifts as you play. If that sparks anything for anyone, I'm curious to hear about it. I mentioned, like, in your work, is there a thought movement that's already underway, or one that you fantasize? How does it link up with, or as Karen Barad would say, diffract the readings, like revealing alignments through exposing differences?
I'll just come in really briefly on from the perspective of something
Thanks.
about immediacy, I think, and presence, and the atopos, the out of placeness of autism, and I've always been quite interested in risk and being on the edges of meaning, and I think that's what's brought me to dialogue. And but sometimes it feels a little bit unsafe, and I'm not sure that I would agree that this is a safe space, because when we think about what is present, I'm from early on, I'm really curious about wanting to include the audience in this beautiful room, and then I'm aware that actually this is very public because it's being broadcast live on the internet. Firstly, to grow a thought movement, the understanding of what's already present needs to be clear, and agreed upon. We have to have in coaching is contract thing. It's that we all agree we're on the same page. We understand things like the basics, the parameters of time and space. So, how long is this going on for? I have to keep looking at my notes, and the watching the unfolding of it, and all the different levels and all the different minds that are here, and being aware of all the different minds and all the different hearts that are witnessing our discussion. And autism, being autistic, has forced me to be out of place, but also to slow things down, to be able to make sense of what's going on, and that's taken me into structured conversations. But I'm acutely aware of this beautiful circular space, which is the circle is a dialogic shape in itself, and I just wanted to draw attention to a few more immediate things.
Would everybody be okay with questions coming in from folks in the audience if that comes up? So if anybody has questions here, you're welcome to probably come to me, and I'll repeat them into the mic so that everyone on the on Vimeo can hear you.
I think there's something really interesting, Alison, as well, about the performative aspect and this being an arts setting, and we want to call it the audience, and there's this structure, and it's a fabulous way that this has been organized, and within the constraints of society, whatever we want to call it, whatever's in the room. But I think it would be really interesting to hear from anyone else.
It's like we've got a contestant.
Hey.
Mm-hmm.
What the story she said about class with that she'd get everyone.
Maybe you can stand in front of me. Come, because I have a lapel mic on.
Oh.
Maybe you can actually be heard. Can you hear?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Wonderful. So I really loved your story, Aaron, about the class that you taught. And one of the questions I was thinking about the whole time was, and just being in the RPI environment where people are always very worried about grades and how they do, the idea of a class where you get an A at the beginning sounds interesting. I was wondering about a class where, what if all the students knew coming in that they would get the lowest possible passing grade the moment they entered the class? Because I feel like I agree that the idea that everyone's going to get an A regardless of the quality, or even if they come to class at all, in some way subverts the expectation of you go to class and the work and effort you put in and how you conform to like a neurotypical environment is what determines how you do. And I wonder about a class where it's the same thing as approach, but to the negative, and where everyone you expect at the start you're going to get the lowest grade and it might hurt your GPA, but you go there regardless because everyone there now, off the start is there because of whatever's going to be discussed and brought to them.
Thank you. What's your name?
I'm Avery.
Avery. Thanks, Avery. I did all my academic study without grades. I studied in Germany before the Bologna Accords, and like I said, I didn't really go much to school before that, so grades are really confusing to me. But I want to be really clear about something. I think if we were to be interested, I'm obviously not, but if we were to be interested in evaluation in that way, it would have to be meaningful. I mean, there would have to be something it meant, right? Beyond the market. So in the university where I studied, the university was free, right? So I studied in Berlin. I never paid a cent to go to university. Nobody ever cared what I learned. Truly, nobody ever cared. One day when you thought you were ready, you would go and find the people who you knew to find, and you would have an oral exam, and then you'd get your degree. However long it took you to get there was up to you. I thought that's how learning happened because I hadn't been schooled into the market value. What I noticed when I entered into the university teaching was that grades were absolutely tethered to the economies of entry, right? We are giving the possibility or the impossibility of students studying with our grades. That's what we're doing. If they get a low GPA, they won't get scholarships. So as long as grades are tethered to the market economy, I'm just not willing. I'm not willing to do that. The other thing is that I think that students are absolutely undermined if what they learn is that they do their work for me. So what I really, really want a student to learn is that they want to learn, right? So I try really, really hard to let them know that I will be there. I really will. I'll be there 5 years from now if you want to talk to me, or 10 years from now, it doesn't matter. But you are not doing your work for me. So I'm never going to ask for it. That doesn't mean you can't bring it to me. And I will read it with great care and curiosity. But what I want you to do is to be invested in study for your own study. And, you know, the interesting thing is that students in my classes do amazing work. So the reason the university hasn't been able to, fire me is because, quantitatively speaking, the students are doing A work, right? Like, it's just really good. It goes beyond what you'd think it would. I tell them the first day of classes that they're going to be giving the gift of their grade to 10% of the people. And with that, I try to get them to understand that what we've done is we've, in academia, set up a scarcity model, very similar to how we do it in capitalism, which has allowed us to believe that we have more value than others if we meet certain expectations. But those expectations are all neurotypical. And I'm not saying that it's not like laissez-faire my way. I think my classes are really hard. I'm teaching really intense concept work. I believe in technique and close reading and I'm saying the opposite of what people who would want to be quick to critique might think. I want you to come and be totally muddled and maybe face the possibility that you can't understand. But I don't want you to be penalized for that. Right? And so what I would say is I would never want to begin with the lowest grade, because that would mean that I believed in the grade. And what I believe in is the work. Right? Now, there are times when I have to do the shitty work. Right? Like, of course, I have to write reference letters, for example. Many, many of us do. And we all know what a not good reference letter looks like. They look like good letters, but they're not good letters. We know how to write those. And we do it in order to, like, I'm often writing 5, 6 letters for the same job. I try to write really personal letters for each one, but I also try to articulate how that person would be really interesting for that job. But sometimes one person could be more interesting for that job. And I don't pretend everybody is the same, right? So it's not a practice that is without bruises, is I guess what I'm trying to say. Like, it's not perfect. And before I got to it, I made a lot of mistakes. And I'll just want to say this because this is also important. I tried things like, tell me what grade you want. Very bad idea. All the women choose lower grades than men. Or, I tried all kinds of things. And then I realized that we're too tethered to the grade. We have to go somewhere else where we're learning value differently. Once we go there and we go where Alison, you were talking about, realizing the sidling of neurotypicality with whiteness, and we realize the conditions um, of ableism and colonialism that drive our processes, then we can have another kind of conversation. And so just to finish that thought, I have a student who's trans in my class. I hope you can hear this with a smile. They're that student you recognize the very first day of class that's like the A student. You always can tell them. And they're also a little bit of a shit disturber. There's a student who's going to talk in each class and is going to, slightly disagree with you and take a bit too much time and take a lot of attention. There's a certain kind of student. And anyway, this student had a very, very hard term. They were in jail for a night because of police stopping them. Their brother committed suicide. It was just a terrible term. They wrote me an email asking me for an A+. And I didn't respond to the email. But when I saw them yesterday, I said I would give them an A+. And I can tell you in this room that they did what would be, if I were to use that vocabulary, the best work. Their book was simply extraordinary. But I said to them, I'm not giving you an A+ because of your book. I'm giving you an A+ because you asked for it.
Mm. I want to note that Ellen is going to have to go very shortly. And there's an aspect to this conversation that I wanted to bring back in to kind of segue a little bit. I went to the Evergreen State College for my undergrad back in the early 90s. And the method there are no grades. I mean, it's specifically for this purpose to make this sort of the flag that they're stuffing in the ground of academia is evaluations. And evaluations are happening from every possible side. So my faculty evaluates me, I evaluate me, and I evaluate my faculty. So, this is just one method. The Evergreen State College still exists, so it's there are alternatives. Yeah, so I wanted to bring up the sort of radical practice of crip curation because I feel there's some really important shared territory among some of our participants. So Anne Fox and you mentioned earlier your co-curator, Jessica Cooley, have written COVID-19 and the continuing effects of white supremacy expose an ideological landscape where some lives, particularly those lived at the intersection of disability, queer, and BIPOC communities, are deemed disposable. Again, bringing back the value models and punitive models. I would love to explore the territories that are shared between Lindsay and Ellen and Anne and anyone else that that as they respond to the material and emotional and physical needs of artists with care, rather than these value models.
Well, maybe I'll jump in just because, I apologize. The reason I have to leave is that I'm involved in co-curating a summit. It's being called an Empower Arts Summit, and it wasn't my idea. It was I made a cold call to somebody because I was interested in his work on music and disability, and he said, "Oh, there's this guy who lives in your town, and Joel is a musician and an equity advocate and advisor, and is blind." And Joel and I met on Zoom a couple of times, and Joel said, "Well, we should do this thing," and so we're doing this thing, and it is all kinds of complicated. It's going to be a beautiful day he wanted to do a day of presentations that would not so much be about the barriers to accessibility, although that's actually the work that he does. He has just been hired as the accessibility advisor for the National Arts Centre, which is Canada's big, shiny, government-funded arts organization, and they've never had an accessibility coordinator before. They only just have an accessibility document or strategy. It's his job to critique and then actualize. And it's I've done a lot of research creation kinds of projects now with various groups of people. But I think this is the first time that I've ever really completely understood that I was signing on to a project that was from the beginning explicitly not mine. So my job is the job that anybody who does community engaged work. It's my job to make the spreadsheets and get the money and make sure there's enough of it and set the chairs up probably and make the sandwiches kind of thing. But I don't want to, that sounds like I'm just saying, well, I'm going to be in service to these guys. So it's not like that at all. There's lots and lots and lots of conversations and little contestations about what the day should look like and what people's desires are and aspects of accessibility that I know nothing about and others that I know more about than Joel does because he hasn't spent a lot of time in the deaf community. So it's just kind of like the Johnny the dialogue of really trying to figure out what is the thing? What are all the stakes at play? What does everybody need? What does care look like if we're going to make it possible for an artist who uses a wheelchair to come to us from Toronto, which is 5 hours away by train? It's really about a lot of practical kinds of things, right? And the care part, I think, as much as anything, has to do with just understanding that I may know how to do certain kinds of things, and I have a certain kind of privilege. I can work the strings at my institution and make it cough up money for things. Sometimes a little bit, and not enough ever. But I don't know most of the other things that are important to know in this situation. So so really I feel constantly wrong-footed and constantly like and you said something about, knowing your own orientation towards grading. I know my own orientation towards organizing. Like I'm itching to go out there and say, okay, I got the spreadsheet. We're going to get these, this and this and this and this and this in place. And some of it's really important. Like I know if I don't book interpreters really soon, I'm not going to get interpreters in this city. But a lot of it is about learning not to do that. And just shut up and not quite leave the room because I need to do my job, but really to hold the space for the conversation that needs to happen, that even if I don't know what that conversation is, that's the thing that's a learning for me constantly. And because I also do this work in my research part of my job, some of what I've had to do is to advocate for that, this kind of participatory work that is often not with professional musicians or whatever, and isn't about making people well. I mean, I think if I were working in this space of music will make you better, my VP research would be all over it. But because it's not, because it's just about participation and what we can all learn through participating in creative activity together, it's a lot harder to explain and to explain as research. But that's okay, because I don't really care right anymore. I just want to be in generative, important spaces of being with people, and I have the privilege of being able to do that at this point in my life.
This sounds like a part of maybe I don't know, an aspect of what you're already doing that is dreaming things forward, that presence that you feel you have a luxury, and it is a luxury, but you're engaged with your work and with this kind of presence that is necessary for us to actually be whole. Yeah.
I was thinking when you were talking about like thinking movement, I feel like I'm involved in a doing movement, which is a thinking movement also, but it's but my job is to my job, my impulse, my imperative. It's an imperative. It's a privilege, sure, to get to try to do things you want to do, but it's also, I think, I think it is vitally important that we all somehow, in whatever way is possible for us, exercise our ability to be to hold space for each other. I think if we don't do that, if we don't learn to listen in that way, then we're truly in trouble. Yeah. Anyway, that sounds like a soapbox ending. It's been a privilege to be at this. I'm going to hang out for a few more minutes because I want to hear what Anne and Lindsay have to say, but I'll quietly sneak off when I have to.
Well, I love that, Ellen, for so many reasons. Partly because I actually came to disability studies through community-based theater with disability. And so when you talk about this idea of holding space, it makes sense to me as someone who's worked in theater, but also, and this kind of is where it pivots into my philosophy of crip curation. It's really trying to center the principles of disability justice. So what are those principles? Well, some of them are leadership of the most impacted, recognizing wholeness, interdependence, collective access. So there's all this idea of how do we create the spaces in which those things can happen. In some ways, I found it easier to be a curator than a professor, partly because of this great issue. I mean, partly I don't think I have it. I don't think I'm there yet where I can walk away from them completely, but I also can really appreciate the liberatory qualities that you're describing, Erin. And I think in some ways curation has been easier in that regard because it's so clearly extractive in some ways, traditional curation, right? I'm going to go to this artist, I'm going to pay them money, and then we're going to take the work, right? And it's transactional versus what I really had I mean, I've been curating for 15 years, but as Allison knows, my most recent curatorial project was a 3-year collaboration with the Ford Foundation. And Alice was a really important artist, both in terms of our Zoom events and the beautiful sculpture she made for our eventual in-person show. And I think because the collaboration was happening during COVID, during increasing awareness among a general public of BLM, Black Lives Matter, there was just this idea of I really need to unlearn the extractive quality of centering the white, older middle-aged perspective that I brought to it. And then thinking about who needs care in the room, and they are not just the people who might need a place to sit, although that's really important, but very much the bodies and body minds of the artists, right? Who are we asking to create along a particular timeline? How are we asking them to create? How are they thinking about the people who come to engage with their work beyond just viewing, in terms of, some of the work has auditory and smelling and sensory capabilities. So I think this idea of moving beyond the work as a commodity, then hang and all glory to the curator, and moving beyond the idea that access in the gallery is just a large print brochure, which is important, but is not where access begins or ends. And thinking about even how access can become an aesthetic of how we create individual works as well as the curation itself. Those are some of the ways I find into crip curation. And I've obviously been on sabbatical because I'm monologuing again, so I'm going to be quiet now. Wow. Lindsay, I know you work as a curator, and I would really love to hear your thoughts on this.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. Well, I just wanted to echo both what you have said, Anne and Ellen, as well as others. I think you've cited a lot of the same principles that animate my own thinking and my own work, specifically the notion that access can be an aesthetic principle, right? That should be embedded from the very beginning of the work, that is situational, contextual, interpersonal. Those honestly, I'm so excited about this kind of reconceptualization and kind of fluorescence of access over the last 5, 10 years, even earlier, and like a growing awareness around that as a creative practice. And there's some really important folks that have helped usher that in as well. But I keep coming back to this phrase that Carolyn Lazard, a disabled artist who wrote a really important work, Access as a Promise and a Practice, that is access should be a promise, not a guarantee. And this is a phrase that I continually wrestle with because I think there's so much value to this idea that it's not a fixed goal, right? That it's always a moving target and that it's always shifting, it's organic. But I found as a curator that it was also really, really hard. It was extraordinarily difficult to work to. I mean, I could talk for hours about this. And I was just thinking about last year when I wrapped a co-curated exhibition with my colleague Vanessa Chang, who's full-time at Leonardo, and we put together a beautiful exhibition with 5 artists who collaborated in every way on this exhibition. They actually helped brainstorm the title, which was Experiments in Art Access and Technology, which was riffing on the EAT movements where you brought art, science, and technology together, but we wanted to insert access into that conversation. And, we worked well together, but we also had a lot of disagreements about what access would look like, what access intimacy was, how we would do access, who was responsible for access. From the beginning, so just for context, we invited artists submitted proposals for a project, and they had about a year or two to develop these projects into kind of working prototypes. And so that was an incredible challenge to invite 5 artists with different disabilities to create entirely new works in this time space during which the pandemic was unfolding. So that was, I think it was too ambitious. Like in retrospect, I think we asked too much or expected too much, but what they produced was really extraordinary. But there were so many challenges along the way, things that we didn't anticipate that were out of our control. Like one of the residencies had to fold at the very end of a project. And so an artist was left without that kind of institutional support that they needed to get over the finish line. Like, how do you navigate that as a curator? I mean, I don't have an answer for that still. But I'm still thinking about what does it mean to be a quick curator when not everyone is on the same page. And sometimes it's stepping back and letting go. But then there's sometimes where we needed to step in and try to get things to the finish line. Otherwise, there wasn't going to be a show. So it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done, but also rewarding. And so I'm excited to talk and think more about it.
Yeah, I want to say quickly that I witnessed the same in the exhibition that Anne is talking about, Indisposable. It had 2 different iterations because it came up, it was supposed to be, oh, Ellen, you're taking off. Bye, thank you so much. We're so honored to have you. I look forward to continuing our conversation. So indisposable structures of support after the Americans with Disabilities Act was supposed to open in June of 2020 and run through the summer, commemorating the signing of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And of course, it didn't happen. But jump in anytime you want. And I was super honored to be part of this. They discovered my work through Recoding Cryptech, Lindsay, which you and Vanessa curated me in, and I was given the opportunity to create a new piece because they were able to fund a series of works to artists that were interested, like projects that could be rolled out online as a chapter, 9 chapters, I think.
Eight.
So
Yeah.
8 chapters, yeah. So I was able to create a super difficult, like all of the things that you said, Lindsay, are totally true from my experience too. It was like incredibly hard just to make a film during this time, but it was animating concepts in an equally difficult piece of writing about neurodivergence. And part of it is playing behind me, in collaboration with other animators. And I witnessed some of the things that you're talking about, that there were artworks, and the same thing happened with Recoding Cryptech. I think that there were artworks that needed to be completed in the space. The artist couldn't be present. And, it was incredible education in all of that to me, but also both of them kind of ruined me for any other curators, because the level of care that was brought to all of the people involved, it was drawing out of us what our needs are and meeting them over and over again. When I was asked what my budget is for making a film, I lowballed it so hard that the gallery person who's running the gallery, remind me their name, and
Lisa Kim.
Lisa Kim is such a badass. She was like, girl, don't do this to yourself. You need to at least double that. And we probably tripled it, and that it was just a fantastic experience of being cared for, provided for, but also like, I don't know, a number of opportunities grew out of that, as a lot of things did in the pandemic, to carry our thoughts forward, doing writing, but even the writing was like in contexts that were alternative. The kinds of things that they were accepting in the issues that we were being involved in were not normative types of forms of writing. So the script for the film that was just showing Stitching the Future with Clues was published in Yale's Theater magazine, and established a relationship with Petra Kuppers, who also wishes that she could be part of this. So hopefully we can do another iteration of this kind of dialogue later. She's an incredible dancer. And yeah, so let's see. We're getting close to we're coming towards the end of our conversation, and I kind of wanted to bring things around. There are a couple of things that I wanted to bring up. First, that neurodiversity is inclusive of everyone, and that includes Elon Musk. And that is something that I'm grappling with and chewing on, how to really bring that level of conversation around neurodiversity and neurodivergence, and the different things that, as Ellen was sort of alluding to earlier, are at stake for different people. And that I don't know, that there's an intersection between unprotected groups. This is something that came up in the exhibition that you curated, and the unprotectedness. And that word has been really important to me since then. Really important. How am I unprotected? And honestly, it kind of shook my self-concept, because I recognize myself as a working class person and how much shame there is there. You know, how much it is a taboo subject to discuss. And it simply is like, it's still something that I haven't brought into my work quite enough. And I'm continually confronting. So that and how non-state sanctioned forms of knowledge production might guide our thinking together. I'm just really interested in discussing possibilities of how we can live into a network of connectedness, like that we might continue what we're doing right now forward and actually create an actual thought movement. I just sincerely hope that what we're doing together today is something that can continue somehow. Because I feel like the time for like relying on theorizing is over. We have to do the things that we're discussing. And this is, you know, something I brought at the beginning about participatory sense making. It's through, you know, Hannah's core in action course and through the podcasts that followed that are actually like, the thinking is the doing and the discussion is the doing, and the things that we're bringing in classrooms are planting seeds in people, whether they're using AI to satisfy the assignment or not. They're struggling with them somehow, you know. So I'll just invite any responses that, or things that might spark in you.
It'd be useful to have maybe a little roundup of everyone's thoughts on that really strong point. From my point, and I'll just quickly put mine in, is I think it was Bohm said, we can't really challenge modernity with the same thinking that created it. So we have to have a really radical review of what thinking is, and they distinguish thinking from thought. Yeah, but it'd be great to hear from everyone.
I think the example of Elon Musk is really interesting. I think he's a cautionary tale that we can't assume that we have to be careful not to romanticize neurodivergence. He's incredibly protected by his money, by his whiteness, by his maleness, and he has chosen. I have no idea what makes him fling around eugenic terms like in the R word, but clearly there's a hatred there, and so it demands accountability, right? It's he's as accountable as every other human being. It's also, I struggle with how people look to his neurodivergence as a cause, which is also anathema, right? So I can appreciate the struggle of what he represents, but I think we have to be careful to acknowledge. I mean, I tell my students this, forgive my vulgarism, but one of the first thing I tell my students is, disabled people could be assholes like anybody else. So where are we holding people accountable? And in terms of putting it into practice in the world, I tell my students, where can you do this work? Where can you put pressure on the structures within which you work? And it may not be in profound, large ways. Something as simple as my coming out to my students as having really serious depression 15 years ago was incredibly transformative in an environment like Davidson, which is like RPI, I would imagine, really high, or like Stanford, I would imagine. Um, and that's a tiny example, but I just try to think about where can we, the curation. I had to really unlearn how I thought about myself as a curator. And I feel like there's such alignment with what Erin's talking about in terms of grading. Like, where do we have to unlearn? I mean, you didn't have to unlearn it. It had never been part of your vernacular. And so that was really powerful. If we feel ourselves tethered to some of these problematic structures, where are opportunities, big or small, for the unlearning to happen, or to listen to folks like all of you in terms of what can I take away with rethinking some of that. So I'll stop there and just say it's been really a privilege, and thank you all.
Hannah, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, in under 2 minutes, quickly. Yeah, I have a question that came up in a meeting I had this morning where I am working with an organization and we're trying to bring in neurodiversity as a kind of undercurrent or diversity of how everybody learns and to help everybody learn. But that was met with resistance from people who felt excluded. So the neurotypical, the white people feel excluded and they say, we can't now go and have neurodiversity because that just excludes all of us. So that was a strange move, which then I have to think, so how do we remain in dialogue with the white neurotypicals who don't see that everybody is unprotected, who react out of their own unprotectedness by saying we can't have this because then we will be excluded. So that is, they are unprotected also. How to remain in dialogue with that? Do we want to? I think it's necessary because and everything, and because recognizing that everybody is unprotected and everybody needs care. But how to break through that is a question that I have.
I would say the dialogue's already begun.
Yeah.
It's a challenge. Good one.
It brings up the phrase, don't meet a swordsman with a poem. Yeah, we got to pull out some swords.
I also have to say that sometimes, I don't know, maybe I'm too close to retirement, but I feel after 20 something years of hostility from colleagues where they sort of repeat the same, fear of losing privilege, whether as, people who have authority over students or whose own neurotypicality. I just find I find incredible hope in really directing those efforts toward how can I change things for students in the classroom, because I feel like they start making those connections with other classes and other spaces. I know I don't mean to sound like I'm avoiding your question, but one of the ways I've dealt with this resistance is just to say, well, where can I send this energy? And for me here in this location, it's more the students than the administrators. I'm sorry, Hannah.
Yeah, that works if you work in an institution where still there's, but I don't work in such an institution. And so that it becomes a little different because we have to, there's a different fight also.
Yeah.
By choice, though, am I right? It was out, I don't mean to, sorry, I'm interrupting you, but it was by choice that you're not working in academia. It was a very extractive environment. Yeah,
both by choice and by force. I was forced out as well as choose. It's a complicated story, but it's difficult. It's spiky and clashy. Yeah. So how can I keep teaching outside of university, trying to bring these things forward?
Academia is collapsing anyway. I mean, we have, it's being completely defunded in the United States. At least federally defunded. And I mean, I shouldn't say it's collapsing. It's confronting itself.
Maybe instead of students, I should have said, I take these ideas to the audiences who will be receptive. I don't know if that helps at all. I mean, obviously, the people who are receptive may not be the people who have the power or the resources. Yeah.
That's one part of the discussion. So where do we where are the resources and how do we pull them? How do we bring them together? within and outside the systems that we have. Yeah.
Lindsay, is there something you want to add?
I think I just have more questions than answers, really,
Yeah,
this
yeah.
time. But it's been really joyous to learn from everyone. I think for me, it comes down to the spaces that I choose to be in. And I find hope in the teaching spaces, being with students who I learned so much from. And so I'm thinking about like those kind of small hyperlocal or even not hyperlocal, some of those network spaces like we're in right now, but like little pockets of conversation or intersubjectivity where we can find and manifest and dialogue. And those are the spaces that I'm like most excited to be in and continue to come back to, you know. So I think that's all we can do. Just keep looking for those spaces, keep manifesting and creating those spaces. So I appreciate you for giving us that opportunity, Allison.
Great. I really resonate with that a lot. And I feel like maybe there's a way of those spaces are connection, they're nodes connected. Can we connect those connected nodes? This, I think, is our job for moving things, like really dreaming things forward. How and what are some models to do that? I use biological models in terms of like in recent talks that I've given, bone intelligence. We have osteoblasts and osteoclasts constantly destroying and rebuilding our bones. They're fluid and they're orchestrated by osteoclasts that we host billions of in our skeletons that live for up to 25 years. I'm blown away. I had no idea that there were cells in my body that lasted more than 7 years. You know, like we hear this, that you were completely regenerated after 7 years, not osteoclasts. So they know you. 25 years they live. So, you know, these are nodes in a network that are orchestrating that constant, destruction and rebuilding of the bones. And so I'm interested in those kinds of models and the ways they communicate with each other as possibilities for how we might organize as a species. Are there any thoughts that you'd like to share at the end of this amazing dialogue, Erin?
Yeah, we need so much more time.
I know.
I loved what you said, Johnny. And I guess I would reiterate it in a couple of ways. Today in the New York Times, there's a Black person, I don't know the author's name, my partner told me about it, who said what I've been thinking about a lot, which is that the people who are screaming in a lot of pain, the people who are screaming loudest right now in Canada and the US and other places, are the people who took their privilege for granted. Black folks have always known what it's like to not be able to count on the world. So I think that a lot of the time we go back, and now I'm speaking as a white-skinned person, to the places where we already know how value is made. I think here of a beautiful essay you can find online called Against Access by John Lee Clark, where he says, why should I care about your ideas of access? I don't care about how you think the world needs to appear for me. And a lot of the time I find that access conversations are super neurotypical, even when led by neurodiverse folks, because people take neurodiversity as an individual thing, re-implanting normopathy in it through that separating out that individualism beckons. So our ways are so profoundly neurotypical, which is to say white, that we find ourselves rebuilding the same systems over and over and over again. And so what I guess I would say is yes, yes, yes to more conversations, but also the practices are happening, folks. I mean, I'm surrounded by people practicing. There's no lack of practicing. And I really don't think we need a dichotomy between thought and practice. This is practicing too, you know. So what is it to have the courage to not be in the identitarian forms of self segregation? Because the normative frameworks will always accept one or two of us, always. So that's not the problem, right? The problem is to create another condition for an encounter, which is so different from what we're accustomed to that we don't even know it's an encounter, right? That it, at a certain level, something else is growing. And so I just really want to thank you for it being such a courageous space. I hope it wasn't safe, to be honest with you, because safe spaces in a way presuppose that they know how to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is it to gather together in the trust that we could actually hold each other up if it got spiky, like in the story that Lindsay you told about people disagreeing about access? I kind of love that, you know. So anyway, I just want to thank you, and I'm moved by this really a lot.
Thank you.
Johnny, anything that you want to add as we close?
No, I'm looking forward to watching it all back.
Oh, great. I so wish that we could be in the same space together. There's a fantasy of mine that I'd like to see what happens in the future. And, you know, as, yeah.
Well, I'm 5 hours ahead, so I am in the future. I can tell you.
Oh, yeah, man. You're way ahead. I just am so honored to have all of you. All of you responded with a lot of enthusiasm, and I hope that this is just an introduction to one another that we can carry forward. And I'm just going to say some deep thanks to faculty here at RPI. Phil Vanderheiden is a collaborator in this piece. We didn't talk much about this, but this is a model of neurodivergence. It'll be completed in the future. Other animators that you've seen are Corey Michael Smithson, Aaron Klein Brinke, and Yuto Horikawa. And you heard as you came in, Pauline Oliveros' Tara's Room, and she will also close out just about now. And at the very end, we'll hear Sunra Orchestra's We Travel the Spaceways. So we're going to transition into our final chill space. Genuinely wish you all could be here. So next time, thank you so much.
Allison.
Thank you to everyone present as well. If you give us a little wave.